It says there, engineering update. This is an engineering update from the United States, or AMSAT North America. We have about 500 members in AMSAT UK. They have about 5,000, so they get more resources. And Jerry Buxton, N0JY, has written this presentation. I'm already reading his notes, so forgive me if I burble a little bit. He says it's graciously presented by Jim Heck. Well, I'll try and do it graciously, but I'm not quite certain how to do that, but still, we'll do our best. And I don't know if Jerry's watching. Is Jerry on the chat? Not yet. Okay, good. So Jerry is, I should explain, is the vice president. I have lots of vice presidencies being in the States. He's vice president engineering, so does all the in charge of organising all the engineering work. And some of this will be ancient knowledge to some of you, maybe news to some. Their main program in recent years has been the FOX program, and they've built 5 of these so far and launched 4, and they've got 1, as you'll see, ready to go. These are all microsats, so the 10-inch cube deal, which there's a model downstairs. So this was the first one, Fox 1A, which after orbit was christened AO85 and launched in October 2015. They tended to go for, I think all the Fox ones tend to be FM repeaters. FunCube's an analog one, but they seem to like FM. One of the things that the States are very good at is involving universities. We do a little bit, particularly obviously with Surrey and a bit with Warwick and 1 or 2 others, but they will actually virtually subcontract, and you'll see later that some of the modules in their satellites are actually made completely by the universities. It's still in operation after 4 years after launch, and considering it was their first CubeSat, they've considered it a good success. The next one was Fox 1B, launched in November 2017 and named after launch AO91. This also continues to operate normally. Once in a while it gets in a tizzy. So does FunCube, actually. It's interesting. And it just needs a bit of an IHU reset. And he says in his notes here that the radiation effects on the radiation measurements they're making and telemetering down have been very useful, particularly around the South Atlantic anomaly. Here's number 3, Fox 1D. They got launched a bit out of order because I had to take the launches as they found them. You can see its orbits, fairly standard. FM repeater again, and you can see some of the experiments there. The HERSI experiment, which stands for High Energy Radiation CubeSat Instrument, it suffered an unfortunate failure either during the latter stage of the environmental testing, or soon after launch. And they think it might be the failure of a solder joint. FunCube was made by, I hadn't realised, but the FunCube soldering was done by a certified ESA solderer. I have to say at great expense, well, not great expense because we're just at the back, but it was a company, Wouter's company, which is ISIS in Delft in the Netherlands. And they employ, I don't know if he's still there, Wouter, or he's retired, but he was a certified ESA solderer, and we thought, well, should we just do it ourselves? Or so we got him to do it, so we can blame him afterwards. But so far, so good. Touch wood. Okay, just watching time slightly. The next one, Fox 1 Cliff. Again, similar orbit, FM repeater. And there's another slide on it. This sadly is, as you can see, stone deaf. He's put down in his notes, deaf as a post. It's just one of those things, you never know. And it never ceases to amaze me the ingenuity that amateurs have in gaining access to extremely large dishes when things like this happen, and a lot of power and stuff like this. People seem very generous at times, and it's not the first time it happened. But I think they've given up on this one. They said before they launched it, it was fine, and they don't really know why it's so deaf. But it's still, I think it's still transmitting telemetry. And he's saying if only they could just look. We had this, didn't we, with AO40. We're trying to get a photograph of it to see what happened because it had an event. Exploded. And no one quite knew how or why. And I never got to the bottom of it because some of the Americans said, oh, we can take a photograph of that from the ground. And they said, no, we can't. So whether they did or not, I don't know. Or whether they can or not, I don't know. Mind you, that was 10 years ago, so things have probably come on. This is the next one. This one hasn't been launched yet, and so they don't know the exact orbit parameters, but they're probably going to aim for round about 90. I would have thought. It's in an anti-static bag, in a Pelican case in the Fox Labs, and it's been like that for about 15 months, and they're still waiting for a launch. And this is how, this again, I'm comparing it with FunCube because I know more about FunCube, and this is exactly what we did with FunCube. When we started building the satellite, we had no idea when, how, or where it would be launched. We just said, let's build the satellite and put it on a shelf, and it'll be ready and waiting. In fact, it worked out really well because a very generous member left in his will enough for the launch, which we got. I think it was a pretty bargain rate. But I won't say the amount now. But that worked very well on a Dnepr rocket. The other thing, yes, it's very sad because the amateur space world, you tend quite quickly to get into NDAs, and the Americans ran into this ITAR thing, and I can't remember what it stands for, International Traffic in Arms Regulation or something. Anyway, it doesn't matter, but it's their regulation. They don't want to sell arms to potential enemies, which is not unreasonable, I suppose. Unfortunately, they classify satellites as arms. And we had this stage quite a few years ago now where AMSAT DL, who were doing phase 3D at the time, were emailing their partners in the States. It was a joint project, just like AO40. And the emails just weren't getting answered. And the reason was because the FBI had been around to people who said, you must not communicate with these people about spacey things outside the States. And of course, it caused a huge amount of misunderstanding for a long time, which we've now got over. And there are methods where if they publish it on a website, I think I'm right in saying, it's public knowledge, so therefore they can. But some of them are quite cagey. Some of them aren't, I have to say. It varies a bit from individual to individual. But we make the best of that. When it comes to launch date, it's got a note here which I'll read. If you allude to something like maybe the date can be found if you Google it, who knows? The other thing they have, which I think is coming up, is I think they pronounce it Ilana. You'll see it on the slide in a minute. This is where NASA provide free launches for universities and non-profit making people for sort of research trainings, things like this. And I Googled it and looked at the NASA pages. They've done 85. They've launched 85 satellites so far. If only our government would do the same sort of thing. It'd be nice, wouldn't it? So this brings us on to the Golf program, which is their current development program, and you can see that it stands for greater orbit, larger footprint, which I think is a brilliant idea. Those of us who can remember the days of Oscar 13, where it would hang in the sky, it was in a highly elliptical orbit, and it would hang in the sky for hours at a time. It was marvelous because you didn't have to get this sort of 50-minute sort of window a few times a day. You could really go and play with it and study it. And we haven't had anything. Thank you. Yes. And so what they're trying to do, so a greater or a larger footprint, obviously the higher it is, the more of the world you can communicate with, which is what we're sort of interested in. And it does you need one or two things to crack before you can do this, which I think we'll come on to. I'll just let you read that. I don't know if you can read that at the back, it's probably a bit small. They're going 3U CubeSats, and the things you need, or the things they want to test, possibly one by one, launch by launch, is attitude control. So you need, assume you're going to have some sort of motor or engine on the satellite, you need to make certain it's pointing in the right direction, so you go up rather than down, to put it in simplistic terms. And that's no simple things of gyro wheels or magnetorquers or something like that. Deployable solar panels get more power. Radiation tolerance, because you're going higher, you get a bit more radiation, so they have to think a bit more about that. And propulsion. I mean, this propulsion thing's been going on for a long time. Various people are suggesting ion engines and plasma engines and magnet things and sails. I think there's one up there now testing a sail with it on the solar wind. To get a launch to HEO, so high Earth orbit, I think it's about 40K. I think Oscar 13 was about 40,000 kilometers out, but it's extremity. Very expensive. These little launches we get going up to sort of a few hundred kilometers are, I wouldn't say they're within budget, but they are sort of affordable if you save up for a number of years, or you get lucky with someone leaving you some money in their will. But to get ready to go to HEO or GTO, geosynchronous transfer orbit, is a lot of money. And in the very early days of AMSAT, we used to get piggyback rides because we knew the director. One or two people knew the director of Visa quite well, and he said, "Oh, go on." Or I know, he's Ariane, and they would literally give us a free ride. But it's got so competitive now, they won't do that. Plus the fact they're a bit nervous about putting too many extra payloads on in case one of them goes wrong and bins the whole rocket. Yeah. So all this slide is saying really they might go. They're not quite certain whether they go 3U or 6U, but they're certainly going more than 1U. And I think that's probably. The trouble is with one of the limitations of a 1U satellite with non-deployable panels is the amount of power you can generate from the power cells, and it's something like a watt. And if you want to have a beacon that's about half a watt, it doesn't give you an awful lot left. Whereas if you go 2 or 3U or a deployable panel, it puts you in a different ball game because you've got a lot more power to play with. They've got 2 projects underway, Golf T and Golf 1. I'm not certain why T and why 1, to be honest. These have both been selected for these NASA ELANA launch, which doesn't guarantee a launch. And I think the deal is you have to write a justification of why you think NASA should launch your satellite. And this can run to quite a few pages, like about 60 or 70, as far as I understand it. But it does mean they're willing to put up the money for a launch, which is about, he's got a figure of about 300K here, so gives you an idea, that's dollars. Money doesn't make much difference these days, does it? He says both satellites are somewhere around the middle of the list of selections, but they're not allowed to give the numerical order. But the orbit that they want to go to is not a very common one, so they're not quite certain whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But at least NASA are still interested in them, which is got to be good. Golf T, this is the target orbit is 600 kilometers, and it's saying rapid deployment. Okay, to test and qualify deployable solar panels, attitude control, and radiation-tolerant avionics. And the targets, it says, I'm reading this in case you can't read it because the writing's too small. The target delivery is about the first half of 2020, and a launch possibly as early as the second half of 2020. And in the process of constructing the flat-sat model. One of the things they've come up against is this requirement now to have a deorbit plan or a deorbit capability. And at the minute, there isn't a CubeSat qualified deorbit system that you can buy or even buy the drawings for. And of course, there've been one or two tests, not many, in recent years, but if they're going for this NASA launch, they won't get away with just saying, well, you know, the orbit's going to decay in 25 years is the limit. Well, at 600 kilometers, it won't. So this is what we did with FunCube. We sort of, I wouldn't say we massaged the figures, but we managed to convince them. And the rules weren't quite as strict then, in those days. This is now Golf 1. Again, he's got the height crossed out because they're not quite certain, but it's they're looking for obviously something more than 1,000 kilometers by the looks of it. Yeah, I think that's probably enough to say about that. They're going for what they call the, I don't know, I did understand it once, but I think I've forgotten. So this is a 5 and dime transponder, 5 gig up and 10 gig down. And this is, what's the guy's name? Got the size of a planet, got a brain the size of a planet, invented the internet, is very wealthy. Sorry? Phil Kahn. This is his baby to have, and I've been at several meetings in the States, I haven't been for a few years, but where he was propounding this thing where you have a digital uplink, digital downlink, and the thing works like a telephone. And I was standing out there saying, no, that's not what radio amateurs want. They could do that with their mobile phones much easier. But he's more interested in the inner workings of the sort of error correcting and all that sort of thing, which is all right for the satellite designers, but not the satellite operators. But we'll see. Here's a list of golf program challenges. The top one's interesting. Regulation is very strict. Okay. Must re-enter within 25 years of launch. But we don't own the rocket or enforce the regulations. And the 25-year rule is something of a moot point, as no approval or deorbit exists for CubeSats today. So they've got a slight chicken and egg situation. You know, the FCC, I guess, is saying you must have something that will bring your satellite down, but there isn't anything that exists. So that's a bit of a problem, not only for them but for everybody, unless you come from someone who's prepared to break the rules. Yeah, it says we're working with NASA and FCC for further opportunities for higher orbits, and companies involved in various aspects of integration launch processes. So that's what we all do, really. And their relationships are good, which is good. It says AMSAT has been recognised by playing by the book earned through our Fox 1 launches. Yeah, I remember talking to a chap who's not here, but lots of you will know, Peter Gertzow, DB2OS, who's the president of AMSAT DL, and did a lot of work on phase 3D. And he made the comment once, when they're at the launch site in Kourou, you have a sort of launch team. I don't know, were you there, Akim? Probably? No. But this is a combined team of Americans and Germans, and they go into a big sort of meeting about the launch. And they were going with several other, I think 2 or 3 other commercial satellites. And he said it was interesting because the team, one of the teams would be, I forget what the satellites were, I can't remember, but one of the teams will be asked a question, you know, what sort of fuel is it? And they say, oh, well, we'll find that out and tell you tomorrow when we've spoken to our fuel experts. But the AMSAT team knew the answer straight away. They said, well, we're using final whatever it is. And he said it was a real difference. And in that way, because they knew their subjects so well, they sort of got the confidence of the launch agency, which has served them well, not so much now, but certainly in the years to come. And I think this is what sounds as if what's the same sort of things happening with AMSAT North America. And I think it's happening with AMSAT-UK, actually. I think we've done ourselves a lot of good with the ARIS program, which you'll hear a bit more later on, working with the UK Space Agency, which is very small. It's nothing like NASA. Come on, Mike, where are you? How many people in the UK Space Agency? Is he here? No. Okay, I think it's about something like 50 or 60. And they just didn't have the expertise to put on a ground station for, I'm thinking of the Tin Peak sort of mission. And so we did ourselves quite a lot of good on that. Engineering outreach. Okay, well here's one of the university models I was talking about, or modules, linear transponder. And the idea is that, which universities I should say, University of Washington, HuskySat-1 engineering model. And the idea is that the university has this design, they can build it, and they will virtually give it to anyone who wants a transponder. And because the CubeSat dimension and everything are pretty standard, in fact they're very standard, it should sort of work. Although people would want to do their own testing. Yes, it says HuskySat in the notes. It's saying HuskySat to provide the only test for a free transponder case. Okay. He gives ARIS a mention here. AMSAT provides both financial and engineering support for ARIS. And okay, here we go, small story. I think it was last year where Kieran invited a young lady student who was still at school doing her A-levels, about 17, and she gave a little 10-15 minute presentation which was about what she got out of the ARIS contact they did from school. And she was very eloquent and was going on about how if they go to Mars they'll have to have treaties and stuff like this for the combined sort of thing. But she made one comment which made me wriggle a bit, and one or two others in the audience said, well, our grandfathers put a man on the moon. And I think, oh, right, thank you very much. But you rather put it all into perspective, I'm afraid. Pardon? What did you say? No, well, she would have been. We forgave her, which is very sweet. So the next few slides are about Jerry's activities. And he writes fairly regularly in the AMSAT North America Journal, which is comes out, I think it's once every 2 months. And it's not printed in colour. Ours is printed in colour. Theirs is only black and white. But there are quite a few members. Well, I'm a life member of AMSAT NA, and I think quite a lot of other AMSAT UK people are as well. But it's very useful to get that. And he writes a column about his activities in that. And he will go to things like the CubeSat development workshop, which is, I think, about 5 days, all about CubeSats, held at Cal Poly, who were the inventors of the CubeSat. I forget the chap's name, Prof something, who decided years ago, wouldn't it be nice if we had a standard size satellite? How very sensible. And look what he's done. This is a picture of Jerry and Drew. A lot of you will recognise Drew. He was here last year. He's their VP Operations. And this is them at talking with the IARU about and FCC licensing. Here's another picture of him, and I'll read the note verbatim. I think one day I look at this and think I look cool. The next day I think, oh, what a dork. Oh, that's a lovely American word, isn't it, dork? I'm good at being a dork, though. Fortunately, that was the last but one slide. The dark AMSAT shirt is slick, though, and the black 50th shirt anniversary one is even better. I think updates, here we go. Well, we'll just leave that running. And I think, yeah, that's the last slide. Any questions? Well, that's been a bit of a rush through, and I'm sorry if it's come out a little sort of a bit bitty. And I apologise to Jerry if I've gone off script a bit, but I couldn't resist it. So thank you very much for your attention. If there are any questions or comments, I'll do my best to field them, or one of my colleagues might. If not, we're about 5 minutes before schedule. We'll break for coffee. Go. I'm sure, yeah. Okay, yeah. Well, I'll leave that for the next speaker. It's a way of keeping the presentation short, isn't it?